I am working on a pair of fingerless mitts and action. Hello, friends. If I don't seem overly bubbly today, it's because I've had a very difficult couple of months. I haven't seen you for a while. I know. Where do I begin? Begin with skin cancer, begin with mother-in-law on hospice, begin with returning from beautiful trip to Paris and having to go back out to the airport and go to the home of my in-laws in another state. Um, it's been hell. And in the middle of all of that, my beautiful computer decided to die on me. I had to buy a new computer, re-download all of my applications. It's probably the worst couple of months of my entire life. So much stress. And that's why you haven't seen me, but I'm going to try and revive my spirits and share some knitting with you today, which is why I'm generally here. If this is your first time meeting me, I apologize for being so doom and gloom, because usually I'm pretty upbeat. I live in a wonderful city, and generally I love my life and I love my lifestyle. In terms of my knitting, yeah, I've been knitting a really long time. My mommy taught me when I was 4 years old. And if you go back to episode 1, and I'll put a link here, you'll see my original turquoise celluloid knitting needles that I've always had with me. I stopped knitting for 2 very long periods of time. And about a year before the pandemic, I really kicked things up a notch. This was the first sweater I knit, actually, when I came back to knitting for the third go round. I'll put a link. You can find the details of the beautiful yarn. It's part cashmere, if I remember correctly. It's really lovely. So, I'll put a link. You can go read my Ravelry project page on this one. Since the beginning of the pandemic, though, I've actually made knitting my top priority, and I have not failed to knit a single day since February 2020, when we kind of locked ourselves in. That was before the pandemic really started to blow up. We saw the handwriting on the wall and took the necessary precautions. And I had just been to the 2020 Vogue Knitting Live at that point, and I had purchased enough yarn to make a coat and enough yarn to make a sweater. And after I exhausted those yarns, because I don't keep stash, I was at that point able to order yarn online. Anyway, this is all distant memories at this point, but there were a couple dozen sweaters knit during these times. Mostly I'm a sweater knitter. On occasion, I do venture out into other types of projects. So if you've been watching my podcast for a while, you'll know that last fall I was in the Shetland Islands for Shetland Wool Week. And while there, I purchased a sweater's quantity of this. I'll come back to this in a moment. But I also discovered a vintage pattern in a 3-ring binder that was in a community center that we visited, where there are lots of local knitters. And I found a pattern for something called a Spencer. I had never heard of a Spencer before, but it's a type of undershirt. And I had yarn left over from another project, my Genie, which, by the way, that sweater is in the Shetland Museum. So I got to visit the original of the sweater that I knit. Most of my Genie was knit in this color, but there were 8 other colors. And all of the yarns came on these industrial cones. So I had a great deal of this left over because I ordered more of this color than any of the other colors. The yarn is by Color Mart, And as you can see, it's a lace weight yarn. I held it double. I kept rolling off bobbins of a single strand and used a strand from here. So I would be knitting two strands together, which gave me that weight. And this is what two strands looks like. It's a sleeveless garment. It's not finished yet. That's why you see lots of strands dangling. I don't really have a lot of ends to weave in, all things considered, because I spit spliced when I got to the end of a bobbin. The stitch is a really interesting 4-row repeat that's done in these columns. It's not just plain knits and purls. There are make ones, and in some instances you have to knit into the stitch below the stitch that's on the needle. So it makes a really interesting motif. It's also very forgiving. I have many, many errors in here, but you'd be hard pressed to see them because the pattern is a little bit on the busy side. There will be a crochet edging and around the armholes too. And I think there's a way to make openings so that you can weave ribbon in, and I'll try and do that. But I just wanted to show you, even though I've been going through some hard times, I did push forward with this. I was really on a mission to finish it. It was tedious knitting. This took me about 4 months. I wasn't knitting on it monogamously, but it's a lot of knitting on a size 2 needle. I wouldn't make it again, is what I can tell you. But I'm pleased with the outcome. And although winter is coming to an end in New York City where I live, it's still kind of chilly. I don't know if I'll get to wear it anymore this year, but there will be other winters in my life, I hope. Okay, now to the yarn that I bought in Shetland. This yarn, Croft, is made for West Yorkshire spinners, but it's made by the people at Jameson and Smith. It is 100% Shetland wool. It's an Aran weight, 166 meters, and it calls for size 6 needle. I've been using 6 and 8 US. This colorway is called Marister. It's sort of a beige background with a lot of blue flecks and then some brownish flecks. It's very squishy. And I decided to knit another sweater for my son. It's not vintage. You know, many of the things I knit are from vintage patterns. This I am designing myself, and I'm going about it in a very unique way. I wanted to see how my concept was going to look. So I started with a twisted rib, and then I sectioned off 12 stitches separated by a column of purls. It's maybe better to see it on the back. So that's the back of the purl columns. And what I'm doing is a cable here, and then within that border, another cable here. So they're going to be staggered all the way up. I think you can sort of see the effect, but I wanted to get going on the sleeve. So once I got this far enough so that I could see that I like the look of it, I started to knit a sleeve. And I really prefer to knit 2 sleeves at a time. But again, you know, when I'm tentative about something, I've had so many experiences where I've had to rip out almost complete garments and start from scratch. So now I'm a little bit hesitant to go all in just in case. So after I got partway up this sleeve, I decided to begin the other sleeve. And pretty soon, when this sleeve is the same length as this one, I will get them onto the same needles, and I'll be knitting 2 at a time using magic loop. I'm going to show you a little video of something else I'm doing in that way, where I have 2 fingerless gloves on the same needle, magic loop. Also, let me see if I can show you this. That's a little hard, a little unwieldy. I wanted to somewhat mirror the cables, the positions. I'm not going to change the direction of the cables, but this first cable is far from the edge, so I wanted to make this first cable far from the edge. So all the cables are always going to be twisting in the same direction. They're just going to be staggered. To be continued. It's really squishy. I like the yarn a lot. I'm really enjoying knitting with it. It's not splitty. It does have a fairly loose twist though. So it untwists rather easily. You can probably see the air coming through here. The only downside to that is when I'm making one and I'm maybe twisting it in the opposite direction of where it wants to go, but it's not a big deal. I mean, it's almost not even worth mentioning. I'm working on a pair of fingerless mitts by Suzanne Bryan, and I'll give a link in the show notes to where you can find this free pattern. But I just wanted to show you very quickly how I'm knitting 2 at a time. So I have both the mitts on the same circular needle. I have half the stitches from one on the front and on the back, and then half the stitches from the other on the front and the back. And I can always tell where I'm at because the yarn is facing me. So this is my next yarn up. So I'm just going to push my stitches close to the tip of the needle, and I'll start to knit into here. I'm doing ribbing right now, so I'm knitting and purling. Continue this. Okay, now when I do this last stitch, I have to turn my work and push this needle back. If you're not familiar with magic loop, this is the magic loop method. Here's the loop. And here's the tips of my needles. So I have to push these forward. And here's my working yarn. I'm going to pull the back needle out and continue right on knitting. And when I get to the end here, I'm going to jump over and start with this, and my yarn will be there for me. The only thing you have to really worry about when you're doing this is this juncture point. You don't want to have a big ladder there. So you want to really tighten up. And there are lots of videos that show you different techniques for doing that. I also wanted to show you that I have done this much and I still have a bunch of yarn left. So this project is easily accomplished with 1 skein of the Rowan Softyak Dk. I wanted to announce my next knit along. I'd like to invite you to join me to knit with just 1 skein of yarn. So it's going to be called 1 Skein Wonder Knit Along, hashtag one Skein Wonder knit along. And the first 10 people to sign up will get their choice of one of the colors behind me. If you want to see the full list of colors, I'll put a link here to the episode where I described and I went through each of the different colors. So the first people who contact me will have first dibs on the color. But if you're not amongst the first 10, you're still very welcome to join us. We'll meet once a week on Zoom, just for a couple of weeks, maybe 2 or 3 weeks. We'll come together as a small community and share which projects we're working on. I did want to run through with you some suggestions that I have. Now, I personally am working on a pair of fingerless mitts, and I still have quite a bit of yarn left over. I haven't waited. I don't know if I have enough to make a second pair, which I probably wouldn't do, but at least you can get some idea of how much knitting you can get out of one of these balls. Right now, I wanted to break away to Ravelry to give you some ideas of some projects that require this amount of yarn. These 50-gram skeins have 148 yards. Of course, you can use whatever yarn you want. This is DK weight. On Ravelry, I've chosen a handful of little different projects that could use a DK weight yarn of this yardage. All of these patterns, by the way, are free. So these are called no-show socks. They're like a little head, if you remember that word, sort of like a slipper slash sock, but using very little yarn. You don't have to do them striped. Of course, they could be a solid color. So I thought that was a small project, easily accomplished. I also propose the royal icing headband. This takes 82 to 109 yards of a DK weight yarn knit on a size 4 needle. And you have the option of putting beads or not. Even though for many people winter is over, it seems like a small thing to keep on ice until next winter. There's also the Metolius River cowl. You can see in this picture, it's just the cowl. There is a sweater that matches it, but the pattern is separate. So I thought that was a little unusual. I tried to pick things that you might not be looking for on your own. 145 to 175 yards. So you'd have to do maybe a slightly bit shorter. I guess you could knit until you ran out of yarn. This is done on size 5 and size 6 needle. Then we have baby Uggs. Aren't they adorable? If there's a baby in your life or a baby coming soon, on size 5 needles, these will get you in under 109 yards of the DK. Here's a beanie that is called Twist and Vote by Romy Hill that calls for 110 yards. Another unique product would be a case for a hot water bottle. And this too, it looks like you could keep knitting until you run out of yarn. Seamless, bottom up, knit in the round on a size 6 US needle. It says 180 yards, but I think that you just would have a shorter neck. And then last but not least, who doesn't need a cute little teddy bear? It only takes 123 yards, knit on a size 5 or 3.75 millimeter needle. And wouldn't he be cute in just any color? Doesn't have to be brown. Teddy. And then, of course, there's the Fingerless Mitt tutorial by Suzanne Bryan, which is what I have selected to knit. I should mention a few things about this yarn. First of all, the construction is chainette, which makes it very non-splitty. It's really a pleasure to knit with, actually. It's 76% cotton, 15% yak, 9% nylon. And I don't know if I mentioned this before, knit on size 6 needles or 4 millimeter needle, it should give you 22 stitches and 30 rows per 4 inches or 10 centimeters. I'll put a link in the show notes that will give you other information about the knit along and how to go about signing up. So you'll remember in a recent episode, I promised to do a drawing for several of these pom-pom trim guides. And the winners are Maureen Capitosto, A. Hazuda 2010, and Mom to 6XX. So if you're one of those 3 people, please reach out to me privately. You can find me on Ravelry or Instagram at billietoy, and I'll get that on the screen for you. Congratulations to the winners. I'd like to take a moment right here to just remind you to like this episode. If you're enjoying it, give it a thumbs up. Also, feel free to subscribe to this channel. And just below this image, you'll see a little thanks button. Feel free to show your appreciation for the effort that I put in by clicking that little button. Comments on this video are also a really fantastic thing to help the channel out. So feel free anytime to comment. Usually any drawings that I host are based on people who comment. So you never know when that's coming. So comment early, comment often. I haven't mentioned for a while that this September I will be returning to Scotland. If you didn't see the episode where I recap my visit to Shetland Wool Week, I'll put a link up here. Do go check that out. And there's lots of images of my stay. We were in Edinburgh and Glasgow as well as the Shetland Islands, and I enjoyed it so very much. I'm taking a small group of people back with me September 2023. Please reach out to me again at billietoy, either on Ravelry or Instagram, to let me know if this is something that you might be interested in. It will be a full week. We'll see lots of great art museums. We'll visit the palace. We'll visit a castle. We'll see the home of Charles Rennie Mackintosh and a whole array of other cultural things. If there are a lot of knitters along, we'll also try and carve out some time to visit several of the local yarn shops. But there's so much else to see there. These are historic, beautiful cities with so much grand architecture. So if you like the things that I've shown, I'm going to be going back to a lot of those places. So reach out to me. We'll have an opportunity perhaps to meet in person. And for sure, if you're planning to go to Shetland Wool Week, I will make sure that you get to the ferry boat in time to arrive up there. Well, I think that's it for this episode. I'll try not to be a stranger around here. I hope you're enjoying your knitting. It's been my salvation these difficult months. Thanks for being here. I'll see you next time.